Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Pod Save the Youth. Today, we'll be talking all about the impact of the presidential debate on the state of the 2024 presidential race in the US. And we have two amazing people joining us today.
My name's Meera. I'm one of the co-hosts of Pod Save the Youth.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Sunjay Muralitharan. I'm from Fremont, California, but I go to school at the University of California, San Diego. And outside of that, I serve as the National Vice President for the College Democrats of America, and a DNC member, which I kind of get as an ex officio seat through that role. And through my role as National Vice President, I kind of oversee the collegiate arm of the DNC, spanning approximately 30 states and over 250 chapters. I'm glad to be here.
So, in May, Joe Biden agreed to participate in a presidential debate with Donald Trump. This would be the earliest debate ever scheduled in a general election in the United States. And when the debate actually happened, Biden widely underperformed expectations, showing signs of his age, which was basically the reason why Joe Biden agreed to the debate in the first place, to try to refute some of the questions that he was really up for the job of going into this campaign in this election year. So at the same time, Trump appeared calmer than he's previously appeared at his rallies in the past few months. Were we expecting President Biden to have the performance like the one that he did at the debate?
I mean, personally, I was relatively surprised. I think Joe Biden throughout his career is a relatively effective debater. We've seen him in both vice presidential debates, trounce, both Paul Ryan and Sarah Palin. And even the 2020 spear, I'd say he beat Trump in every single debate up to this point. So I was personally surprised. I think it's no surprise that Joe Biden isn't in his prime. I think he's admitted it. Countless Democratic talking heads and upper echelons within the Democratic Party have admitted that. But even so, I was honestly quite surprised because I think walking into this debate, we all knew the most important thing Biden has to do is kind of convey that he is up to the job and isn't, completely out of his prime. And I feel like um, that was the main hope, and him not achieving that kind of really surprised me because I really thought that he'd be able to match up to that threshold, especially when his State of the Union was pretty effective. Like I back then, I was pretty concerned, and then I saw him give that speech, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm wrong. So I definitely was surprised.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was surprising to see Biden kind of slip up so many times. Like you said, Sanjay, like he is like obviously not in his prime years right now, but I would say like overall, I thought that some of his key points like abortion rights and some other topics would be more like concisely communicated, whereas I was surprised to see when me and David were watching it, like there were many kind of moments where he kind of seemed to just go off track or just like just completely forget the point of what he was trying to say, and that was kind of disappointing. And I think another big thing was also just like the petty arguments between the two. I expected Biden to kind of ignore what Trump was saying and focus on the questions being asked, but there were certain questions where both of them just completely like ignored the question altogether, and that was not great because I wanted to see personally Biden's plans on addressing some of those very important questions like childcare. So yeah, I was definitely surprised.
Yeah, me too. Let's talk a little bit more about that abortion topic. This is widely considered to be Joe Biden's best issue in this campaign. Obviously, this debate took place 2 years after the Supreme Court overturned the precedent of Roe v. Wade, ripping away abortion rights from millions of women across the United States. And this issue of abortion rights definitely contributed to Democrats' prevention of a red wave election in the 2022 midterms. And most people were saying that Biden in this debate, going into the debate, was going to be prepared to perhaps give his strongest argument of any issue on the issue of abortion, talking about how he wanted, in his words, to restore our country to the precedent of Roe v. Wade. But during the debate, as you said, Mira, he was unable to do that. Even on the issue that he should have been most prepared to answer to, he instead shifted the question to his weakest issue, the issue of immigration. And I was wondering, like, what were your reactions just to that answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to preface to give him credit where credit is due, in the sense that, Biden did save us from another 4 years of a Trump presidency, another potential 4 years of more judicial nominations. So I do give him credit for that, and I do appreciate him, being a unequivocal supporter of a woman's right to choose in somewhat of a dystopian era where a precedent as long as Roe v. Wade got overturned. I learned about this in my AP Gov class in senior year as like a long-standing precedent, and then in that year it got overturned. So I definitely think it's important to give him that credit, but also be cognizant of, as you said, his responses could have definitely been better. And I think the main reason for that, I simply comes back to the beginning. I just think he is somewhat out of his prime, and I don't think that is something we should be afraid to mention. I think countless Americans are having that thought in their head, and it's an important conversation to have. But I do think, though, I appreciate the work that he has done, and I appreciate the fact that, I think his his official stance on this issue matters more than this performance, but that doesn't justify, I think, completely overlooking his performance.
So what should the Democratic message be on the issue of abortion in opposition to Donald Trump's stance during the debate of, handing it back to the states and giving states the ability to enact these extreme abortion bans?
This is one of the Democrats' strongest issue, primarily because the vast majority of Americans are pro-choice. I think we live in a country that's kind of built on the foundation of liberty, and restricting someone's right to anything, whether it be, something like restricting assault weapons or restricting abortion, generally is just unpopular. Whether or not you agree with either, I think it's a unilateral consensus that they tend to rustle a lot of feathers. So I think for me, the most important message should be, we are on the popular side. I think an important fact is that every single time abortion has been put on the ballot box, abortion restrictions have been put in the ballot box, it's failed. And I'm not just talking about my home state of California with Prop 1, I'm talking about states as red as Kentucky. I think the only state that might keep an abortion restriction on the ballot box would be something as red as Alabama. So I think it's important to make that case that, um, you know, every time we've seen abortion tried and put in front of the voters, they've rejected such restrictions. I think just kind of hammering on, this is the popular thing. We want to ensure, liberty throughout the nation for women, and we want to keep it in a relatively reasonable threshold is kind of the best way forward. And I think Kamala Harris has been a good spokesperson for this. She's been going around the country talking about it, and I definitely think that's something we should continue to hammer on because the Republicans, I know they definitely didn't want, I think, Roe v. Wade to be overturned because they were well aware that this is an unpopular issue. So it was, I would say a lot of the lower base were happy, but the politicians themselves weren't. And I think that kind of, there's good reason for that because, as you said, this is the Democrats' most strongest issue.
Let's talk about the issue that was the most discussed issue during the debate and the issue that Biden shifted his answer on abortion to, the issue of immigration. And during the debate, Biden touted his executive orders that recently would allow the US government to close the border if the number of migrants attempting to cross was too high and deemed like unmanageable. At the same time, Trump claimed that Biden let millions of people into the US who were taking Social Security benefits and, quote, black jobs, whatever that means. And Trump's real immigration policy is much more severe and much more extreme than what he talked about during the debate. It is a policy of ripping families apart, like he already did, as well as enacting mass deportations of immigrant communities who are already in the United States, already contributing to the country, in some cases for generations. And I'll ask, how can we effectively communicate to young people specifically, because this is Pod Save the Youth, about the extent to which Donald Trump's immigration extremism is going to hurt the country in a way that, Biden was not able to do during the debate?
No, yeah, I think the issue of immigration is one of those, I would say, lose-lose issues where it's just so hard to figure out what the way forward is. Because on one hand, it's an impossible political mandate. We simply don't have the capacity to welcome in every single asylum seeker. But on the other hand, that doesn't, these people have been through hell and back and they deserve a better life, right? So I think it's a tough tightrope to walk, and I definitely think the Trump administration has overly politicized it, to the point which has made it a lot worse. The moment that people's livelihoods start to become politicized, I think that's when everything goes to shit, for lack of a better term. But to answer your question, I think there's a few things to unpack, I think, with Trump's immigration policy. I think what comes to my mind first is zero tolerance. I think the fact that, people entering on the first time, regardless of the reason why, regardless of the amount of times they've entered, are immediately thrown into detention is wild. Like in the previous eras, they would either have to be repeat offenders or they'd have to have committed a very serious crime. And I think conveying that message is extremely important because it goes to show that, hey, this guy simply doesn't value the livelihoods of those people coming across the border, especially when it's a clearly political move. Because if you look at the numbers when it comes to effective alternatives to detention to get people to show up in their court and when they're discussing their deportation, 99% of them will still show up even if they're not detained. So alternatives to detention work.
Yeah.
And even so, he's still willing to do this. So it shows that he's not trying to solve the problem. It's just a political ploy to say, I am tough on immigration, without actually making an impact. And I think that's important to highlight because it shows that, he just simply doesn't care about the livelihood of these people. And, there's an argument to be made whether or not Trump is a racist person, but this policy is explicitly racist. And I think that's important to highlight. The second thing would be just how immigration is the strength of our country. Like my dad, for example, was someone who came here off of an H-1B visa, and now he owns his own semiconductor business, and he's contributing to the economy internally. And with kind of that strength, we're able to pilfer some of the best talent across the country. And that's kind of what makes America, the strongest economy in the world, because we have that capacity. People want to come here for opportunity. And I think it's very risky to put someone in power who is inherently anti-immigrant, because it's anti-American in the sense of like, if you care about, America being the greatest country in the world, you care about immigrants. I think, I mean, I'm from South Asian descent. If you look at the numbers, South Asians make up 1% of the population, but they pay up to 6% of income tax in the nation. So it's like, and that's a whole model minority myth thing to unpack. But the point is, you're pilfering the best talent across the nation. And that's something you want to continuously harbor. So I think those two, just Trump's just general distaste for actually solving the problem and more of just, playing the political game is what we need to highlight.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think that like what Trump is overlooking is the valuable contribution of immigrants. And of course, like you said, there are limited resources, so we can't take in everyone, but Trump's policies are just completely kind of alienating people who are already living here. And just, yeah, overall, it's just not, I don't think that's the solution that we need. Kind of transitioning over to the war in Gaza, both Trump and Biden have established themselves as full supporters of Israel in winning its war against Hamas. Biden said he wanted to see a quick ending to the war as he laid out his ceasefire proposal. But Trump, on the other hand, said that Israel should finish the job and that Biden was a bad Palestinian. Do you think young people fully are understanding the difference between Biden's ceasefire plan and Trump's full Israeli support in racist rhetoric? Or do you think the differences aren't really breaking through?
Well, this is a tough one, because I don't know if you know, but College Democrats of America in the past few months, we did release a statement, standing in solidarity with the student protesters and
Yeah.
urging the Biden administration, to kind of fight for a permanent ceasefire, fight for a two-state solution, fight for an explicit recognition of a Palestinian state and conditional funding to Israel. And largely their ceasefire plan lays out like a large chunk of it. I don't think there wasn't really a mention of conditional aid to Israel, but there was, a desire for a two-state solution and permanent ceasefire, which I think we really appreciate because it does show that they are listening to us as youth. I will say though, I definitely think that a lot of young people across the country don't really see a difference between Biden and Trump on this issue, which I personally think is wrong. Part of the reason why we actually put out that statement was kind of to ensure that you can be a college Democrat and not be happy with Washington's prevailing Israeli policy, right? Because we were seeing people within our state boards resigning over this issue. So, that was kind of part of the reason we did that. But just to get back to your question, I would say most people don't. Um, and I can't blame them because, both of them do starkly differ from youth on this issue. Whenever I get a chance to talk to talking heads in the media, I tell them, you're losing the future base of the Democratic Party by being an unequivocal supporter of Israel's quote unquote right to defend themselves. And I'm not saying, you can't support a longstanding ally that you've had by your side since the Cold War. Just keep it conditional. Um, but I think it's still important that we do speak to young people and make it clear that, Biden is not perfect on this issue, but he can be pushed. He will listen to an extent, right? When we put out the statement, a few days after in his Morehouse commencement, he did explicitly, mention his efforts to push for a permanent ceasefire, his efforts to bring peace to the Middle East. If it were Trump up there, he'd just be like straight up, "Hey, let's finish the job." And by finish the job, he means bomb Palestinian, and that's completely unacceptable. And we that's kind of the stark difference that we need to harbor, and as young people, make it clear that Biden might not agree with us on this policy. He comes from a different generation, a generation, during the Cold War where Israel was instrumental in, kind of opposing Soviet interests within the Middle East. But also he's someone who to an extent does listen to, the young people within the party. And that's something Trump won't do. And I think making that distinction clear is very important. That Biden isn't perfect on this issue, but if we push him, he will listen. And that's such an important thing to mention because he has largely shifted on this issue from being someone who's like an unequivocal supporter of Israel to like, okay, hey, let's get down to this. Let's fight for a ceasefire, and let's ensure that Gaza gets humanitarian aid, and let's work to rebuild post this conflict. And I think the sooner would have been better, but he did it, and I think that does deserve credit, and that's something that we need to explain to young people who kind of view both of these candidates as a lesser of two evils game.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with most of that. I also would say Biden also surrounds himself by people that push him in the administration and outside of it, like the college Democrats, right? But he also has people in his family, like, I've heard that Jill Biden is very concerned about what's happening in Gaza. Kamala Harris was obviously the first person in the administration to actually call for a ceasefire. He has people around him that are able to speak up and represent the opinions of our generation or, other generations might be a little bit older than us on this issue in a way that Trump will just surround himself by people that agree with him 100% of the time. And I would say that to the question, it's definitely not breaking through to people the difference, especially to young people, the difference between the two candidates on this issue. And it's largely just because there are people, thousands of people dying in Gaza that people hear about on social media every single day. A lot of young people are not, consuming news from traditional news outlets, as we've talked about in previous weeks. And, when you see something like that tragedy that's happening, this tragedy that's happening in Gaza right now, you look at who's in charge and you say that they're not doing enough. You look at the other candidate, and if they support Israel in this war, then the candidates look the same. And if this is the most important issue and the two candidates look the same, it can be easy, more than easy, to feel apathetic about this election in general. But I want to move to the next topic as well. Trump's criminality. Biden in the debate did call Trump a convicted felon, I think once during the entire conversation, for his conviction recently in New York for falsifying business records to try to influence unlawfully the 2016 presidential election. Trump also responded by falsely claiming that Biden had committed similar crimes and that the justice system was in fact rigged against him in the same week that the Supreme Court ruled that Trump was immune from prosecution for acts committed as president. So I'll ask the question, is questioning Trump's obvious lack of morals, as Biden did in the debate to kind of attack Trump's legal problems, an effective message against Trump in this general election campaign, or should we be taking kind of a different approach?
I definitely think that there's merit to taking a different approach. I don't think it is a secret that Trump is someone who's been riddled with controversy. Prior to being a convicted felon, he was a two-time impeached president. Prior to being a two-time impeached president, he was a quote unquote successful businessman who's been bankrupt 6 times. How do you pull that off? I don't know. And I think a lot of people are aware of his clear lack of morals, but I think that's part of his appeal. Part of the Trump appeal is that he is running towards something. Like whether or not we agree with it, because I think it's explicit fascism, he is running to a goal and willing to do whatever it takes to get there, willing to tell anyone however he feels. That kind of seeming bluntness kind of adds to his charisma, I think, with his base. And the more and more that we hit him on like, oh, he has no morals, they just simply don't care. It's kind of this cultish following that surrounded him where they think anything that stands against him is rigged, right? The election was rigged, our justice system is rigged. Everyone's a liar except him. And it's an effective tactic because when you believe this guy is God, and you believe that, he's the hero against establishment, when the so-called established institutions like, proper elections or the judicial system stand against him for clear reasons, they ignore, the conventional wisdom and side with their guy. And I think for the Democratic base, we know that Trump is flawed. We know that he is a convicted criminal. We know that, as you said, he has an obvious lack of morals. I mean, there's just a million things that you can talk about, like whether it's like the way that he speaks about women. But what I think we should do is there is some merit to this strategy within the Republicans right now in this consistent sense of they're running towards something. And as Democrats, I feel like we're consistently running away from something, running away from, the Trumpian era, running away from, a potential, red Supreme Court. We need to start running towards something in the sense instead of talking about Trump's lack of morals, what makes the Democrats great? The fact that we're fighting for a just economic system where workers have the capacity to fulfill their happiness. That we're running towards a nation that harbors climate justice. So people like you and I will be able to live well into our 60s and 70s and 80s with a habitable climate. Running towards a country that respects a woman's right to choose, a country that respects democracy. I think we get so like political junkies like us, get so caught into how terrible Trump is. But when you're an average person, you eventually get sick of that. You want to hear, okay, Trump is bad, but what is Biden going to do? What are the Democrats going to do for me? And I think Biden has a very impressive record that can be spoken about. I think what I love is the fact that he stood with the UAW workers, which was historic. First president in history to ever do that. And we saw following that strike, they got the greatest increase in their benefits and greatest increase in their salaries that we've ever seen in the past 20 years. Or in the Inflation Reduction Act, he set climate emission standards lower than anything we've seen in the country. That's him running towards something, running towards, as I mentioned before, just economic system, and just a climate that's habitable. And that's what we need to hammer in because people are sick of hearing Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad. They know. And it's kind of come to a point where he's just so full of shit, for lack of a better term, that more shit on his record doesn't change anything. Either inflames his base and doesn't really change our mindset. So I understand where, the message of Trump lacks morals comes from, but I definitely think as Democrats, we need to step away from that and start focusing on what are we going to do for the American people and what has Biden done. And lucky for us, he has a great record that we can run on.
Everyone knows that Trump's a bad person, I would say. I don't think there's a Republican person that does not believe that Trump has honestly broken some laws, whether or not the question is whether or not they think the laws that he's broken have benefited them, right? That's the real question in this race.
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much summarized everything really well. Like, Trump is such a polarizing figure, but he has such a loyal kind of follower base, as we've seen throughout his kind of time being in politics. It's just every added allegation and charge against him won't really change the vast majority of his supporters, considering they've still stood by him even through all the past kind of accusations and just terrible things that he's been involved with. So I think that, like you said, focusing more on how the Biden administration will be better for America than the Trump administration, and kind of just talking more about Biden's strong points would definitely help, because this is something that we all know about already. So just repeating it might not be as effective as talking more about these other strengths that the Democrats have. So moving on, like more about the question of age, which was something we talked about near the start. This debate in particular demonstrated Biden's clear struggle to campaign effectively in his old age, as he appeared to many as frail, slow to respond, and at times not understandable. Although this appearance is in contrast to Biden's teleprompted performance at the State of the Union address, it is consistent with his appearances at a number of campaign events. The Biden campaign has consistently said that Biden's appearance of age does not impact his ability to do the job of running the country. So after watching the debate, what, if any, concerns do we have with Biden's ability to win over voters on the campaign trail from now to November?
Strength is super important, especially for young people. And they did not see that in Biden a few nights ago. You know, they saw a person that, as you said, Meera, looked weak, looked unable to answer questions. And I think there is a difference, obviously, in the ability to sit down in a situation room and make a decision about whether to drop a bomb on something and how to answer a question about, you know, Trump's criminal trials in a debate. I understand that, but you have to question what do voters see when they see a president on the stage for the first time in many years for a lot of people that they're ever seeing Joe Biden speak. Do they see a president that looks like they're up for the job, or a president that looks like they're unable to remember, you know, some important events? And I think that this election in many cases is going to be a question of what information do people have. Are they getting the messages from the White House that the Biden administration is doing things to benefit them, that the Biden administration is delivering on their promises? Or are they hearing what Fox News and Republicans are saying about Biden, that he is senile and old and unable to govern effectively? And I think in the debate, Fox News got a lot of clips to play constantly over the next few months to kind of justify what they have been saying about Joe Biden for a long time.
Yeah, I definitely, there's no one on either side of the aisle that's going to say that debate benefited Biden in any way. I think it's fair to say he lost. And we can acknowledge that while, you know, respecting him for someone who has had a fantastic career, who has been a pretty impressive president. You know, as someone who didn't really support him in 2020, I'm pretty impressed with his record. I didn't expect him to govern as progressively domestically as he did, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate, you know, him staving off another Trump presidency back in 2020, back when he was largely, you know, tested in a primary and won, when he defeated political juggernauts like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. So I think we can acknowledge, you know, that this debate didn't go the way that we hoped, while also respecting President Biden and then the work that he's done. But I do think that there is reason to be concerned, right? Looking at polling, it's not looking great. We're seeing dips in numbers in New Hampshire becoming competitive. Virginia's been a toss-up for a bit of time. Even Colorado's coming into play. Like, we're not talking about the main 7 swing states that'll determine this election. We're talking about safe blue states. So there is reason to be concerned. I think that as Democrats, it's important that we have, you know, these tough conversations instead of remaining knee deep in sunk cost fallacy. I'm not saying that, you know, that we should replace them or we shouldn't replace them, but there is merit to having this discussion and saying what is the best way forward, because what we're doing right now clearly isn't working. And you can say that and still respect Biden and still respect, you know, Democrats, and still want to be someone who's advocating for Democrats across the nation. But we just need to be cognizant of that. And the reality is, you know, whether or not you're a Biden diehard or absolute Trumpian, this debate did not play well for Biden. And as Democrats, we need to have that tough conversation and say, okay, where do we go from here?
I mean, we can talk about his record all day, but it means nothing if Trump wins.
Mm.
Everything that Biden has done over the past 4 years will immediately be overturned by Trump if he wins. So that leads to the reality that the most important job that Joe Biden will ever do in his presidency or probably in his political career, just like in 2020, is defeating Donald Trump. And if Joe Biden is not able to defeat Donald Trump again, then it doesn't matter what he did over the past 4 years because it means absolutely nothing. And I think that's a thing that a lot of Democrats in our country have not fully grasped yet. We have to nominate someone who is going to stand the best chance of winning because we can admire everything that Joe Biden did, but it means nothing if Trump wins.
Yeah, no, I agree. And adding on to that, like Joe Biden is kind of obviously the face of the entire Democratic Party. So when you're someone who maybe doesn't know much about his policies or isn't very involved in politics, and you see this on a surface level, a lot of people just see Biden's age and they make assumptions and they think that he won't be as effective as they think he will be. They don't know much about the policies that he's put into place or the many benefits that he's brought well during his presidency. So I definitely think that what's really important is ensuring that Trump does not win this election. And unfortunately, I do think that Biden's age definitely is something that people seem to hyper focus on. And this debate has definitely kind of exasperated that.
In the aftermath of the debate, there have been a few Democrats in Congress and a few editorials of other Democratic officials across the country who have floated the possibility of Joe Biden being replaced at the top of the ticket by another Democrat. But most big names in Democratic politics have still backed Biden after the debate. So this is why the possibility of Biden ending his campaign is still, at this time, very unlikely. But in the off chance that this does happen at the DNC convention, the delegates who have been elected, two of which are on this call right now, will be the ones deciding who becomes the Democratic nominee and who ultimately goes against Trump in November. So, what do we think about these calls for Biden to end his campaign after the debate?
I think we, as Democrats, it's important that we keep an open mind. I'm seeing a lot of people on Twitter being diehard saying, Biden or bust, and then a lot of others who are willing to dump him. I think the true way forward is to remain united, to stand with whoever the nominee is. And I say whoever because it might be Biden and might not, right? I think as it stands right now, as you said, it's very likely that it is still going to be Biden. But looking at how polling numbers, as I mentioned before, just are looking like extremely unfavorable when betting odds are showing Kamala Harris as the most likely nominee, there's a reason to have these conversations and a reason to keep an open mind. But the most important thing that we can do as Democrats is no matter who this nominee is, let's unite behind them because we cannot afford another Trump presidency. And as you said, the most important thing that Biden needs to do is defeat this president who is a clear threat to democracy, a clear threat to our environment, and a clear threat to all of our futures. Um, so it's definitely it's a tough spot that we're in, and I can understand where both the established and progressive camp are. I work with a lot of people in the California Democratic Party, and I've been seeing, I've been scrolling to see what they've been talking about, and I'm just like, I, I think there's this kind of flawed alienation that we're seeing, right? We're seeing, the 45% of Democrats who aren't happy with Biden being described as the bedwetting brigade. But we're also seeing, the Democrats who want to drop him, like pointing the finger at the establishment for getting them in this mess. And I think there's merit to that opinion, but this isn't the time to have that conversation. We need to learn from this. But at this moment, the best thing we can do is say, hey, we don't love where we're at. That debate performance wasn't great. We might not be in the best position possible, but there's one thing we do know. Whether it's Biden, whether it's Harris, whether it's whoever it is, that person is infinite times better than Trump, and we need to coalesce around them. And I think that's an important message to say. As for in the unlikely chance that, this does occur, because, as you said, Biden is the only one who can drop out. He's already won the nomination. It's up to him. And we've seen, his family be pretty ardent about him pushing through. But in that unprecedented moment, I think the one who makes the most sense would be Kamala Harris, just because she is the vice president. Yes, she is somewhat nationally untested, but she is the theoretical successor. I think the only person that outpolls her in popularity is Michelle Obama, and Michelle Obama does not want to jump into politics. So I would say the most likely pick would be Kamala Harris, but the odds of that are so low. And I think the most important thing we can do as Democrats is let's sit here, keep an open mind, and respect that, hey, we might not agree on who the best nominee is, but we can agree that we can't have another Trump presidency. And let's work together, let's build a coalition, and let's defeat Donald Trump in 2024, no matter what.
I think while the conversation has been kind of moving towards this stance, I still think it's not entirely there. There is some hesitancy with some Democratic officials to admit that Biden is maybe not the strongest candidate going into November. But I think as delegates to the national convention, we have to be able to say, as you said, Sanjay, who is the most effective candidate to beat Trump? Maybe that is Joe Biden. And then let's go with him. But let's have a real conversation right now and say, is there anyone else who is better positioned? What are not only the polling numbers, because I think those are kind of early at this point, and there are some problems with polling like Newsom against Trump because a lot of the country doesn't know who he is. Let's say, okay, who has the strengths that we need in a candidate? Maybe Kamala Harris has the strength of having the money turnover that Biden has already raised into a campaign. Maybe Biden has the name recognition that it would take to win a presidential election. Maybe we'll go with him. Maybe Governor Newsom of California is able to take on Republicans in a debate. Maybe that's what we really need. So I think we have to have a conversation about the candidates and soon, quickly, before the roll call, which would officially nominate Joe Biden in early August, we have to be standing united as a party and saying this is who we want to be our nominee. We don't want to go into the convention and just have it be chaos. So I understand that stance. But I also would say, in opposition to a lot of Democrats right now in our party, let's consider the candidates that we could have. Let's see who would be willing to run. And then let's evaluate their strengths compared to Biden. And let's make a decision based on that and not just based on loyalty to Biden.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's also important that we're cognizant of, okay, if we switch, are we able to get them on the ballot in all 50 states? Because I know it's like I'm not, a legal professional, but it's like there's a hodgepodge of different rules that span every single state. And it's important to have these conversations just because if we want to win, we need to be honest with ourselves, right? We need to be willing to have to dip into uncomfort at times. And I think this is a time to do that. And I think, as you said, David, Biden very well might be the most effective candidate. And there's merit to that opinion. He does have the name recognition. He does have the record. But we're also, with a lot of major, Democratic officials starting to sound the alarm, we should at the very least keep an open mind. And I think that would be my message.
I think that there definitely are like two sides of the argument, like you both mentioned. I do think that polarization within the Democratic Party isn't the thing that we need right now because we do want to focus on making sure that Trump doesn't win. But I definitely agree, David, with what you said about considering other candidates, because if there are candidates who could be more effective, for instance, at counteracting what Trump is saying, or just in general positioning themselves, conducting themselves, I think that is something to consider because a lot of times voters will look to the leaders to see how they react to certain situations and how well they can kind of defend their own policies. And yeah, I do think that's definitely something that we have to consider. But at the same time, like also consider Biden just in terms of how influential he's been, him, this past like presidential term, being the leader. I think that is a big thing. And there are certain Democratic leaders who might be very kind of accomplished, but who many people might not know about. And I think that does play a big role. So yeah, I think it's important to consider both kind of perspectives.
And I'll say one more thing. I think that there's also a real question before there was a real question before the debate on whether a Democratic nominee, even if Biden had a good debate performance, would he be able to win over voters of color and young voters in the same way that he did in 2020 in light of his support for Israel and the war in Gaza? And I think that's a real question, and we have to consider not only the debate performance, but also just Biden's lack of support from a bunch of different groups and say, is he really able to turn the tides with young voters, with voters of color in time for the election? Or would we be, again, better positioned to win if we had a candidate that was maybe not in the administration right now? And that's what I'll say on that. But Sunjay, thank you so much for joining us today. And where can our audience go if they would like to support your work and the work of the College Democrats of America in defeating Donald Trump and winning Democratic victories across the country?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And there's a myriad of ways that you can go about to support the College Democrats of America. If you go to our Twitter, pinned in is our Act Blue, where you can leave a small donation to support our work. You know, as college students, we are unilaterally broke and need all the help that we can get, you know, to ensure that we have the operational costs to run our organization. But also, I think the best thing that you can do is join your local College Democrats chapter. You know, check in your school. Do you guys have one? If you don't have one in your school, go to our website and see if there's a statewide federation. We kind of have a network of our 30 plus statewide federations there. You can just Google College Democrats of America. First thing that comes up is our website. And if you find that your state, you know, is either not chartered or isn't doesn't have a statewide federation, reach out to our membership team. And maybe we can have you be the leader of a new state. You can be the president of, you know, a statewide wing of the College Democrats of America. Or we can get you plugged in, you know, to your state that happens to be not affiliated with the national org. So the best way that you can support us is kind of joining us and ensuring that you know, the best interests of youth are harbored within the party. I like to view College Democrats of America as an apparatus that represents youth to the party, not vice versa. So by joining and sharing your voice, you're kind of helping ensure that in an election year where we're kind of breaking the gray ceiling with the two oldest candidates in history, we're also ensuring that the best interests of youth are being harbored at the highest level of government. So I hope you'll consider joining us. And again, thank you so much for having me, David.